We're going to go over how you can hit your first 4-plate deadlift, and we're going to start right now. Growing up, one of the coolest things, I would ride my bike 3.5 miles up to the local bodybuilding powerlifting gym called Bodyworks. I would go in there. There'd be dudes, so this is the late 90s, early 2000s. There'd be dudes ripping up there in their Harleys. They'd have their jorts on. They'd have their Tims. They'd be wearing their American flag bandanas. They'd have their denim jacket with like this crazy eagle on the back. They were in biker gangs. But this was like cool. This was extraordinarily fun. And I'd go in with one of my buddies. We'd meet there once a week. Without fail, there'd be 4 to 5 of these guys hitting monster deads, just monster deads. And the one dude pulled over 600 pounds, was probably like 210, 215. And he had the technique similar to Eddie Cohn. Okay, so not like a true sumo, not conventional. He was shorter, probably like 5'7", but had that like semi-sumo type pull. And I would constantly just sort of watch what they would do. I would ask them questions. They would talk to me about supplements, what was I eating and things like that. Even at one time, the one guy, there was a Surefine next door. I would actually go get a donut in strawberry milk after lifting, and he'd be like, yo, have a little bit more protein than a donut. But anyway, one of the biggest things that I wanted to find out was, what could I do to get to that point? I dreamed of having not just 4 plates, but even getting to the point where you could deadlift 2 plates on each side, the 3 plates on each side. The one dude would consistently talk about the most important aspect is having a training partner. Okay, so you have a training partner and you have somebody who helps you be accountable. You have expectations on when you're going to show up in the gym, and then essentially you know what you're going to be doing every time that you get into the gym. So that was like that first key lesson, is that you had to have a training partner. Okay, so lesson number 1, training partner. Now, the next tip is that when we wanted to work towards that 405-pound deadlift, this guy would see us, and they were like powerlifting bodybuilders, basically. There's a place in our town called Cartech. All these guys worked at Cartech. Okay, so they were welding, they're doing like metal work, just old school type dudes, right? The next thing I would see is that as they were building up in their sets, they might take like 135 for like a set of 5 pounds, 135 pounds for like a set of 5. Then they'd put on another plate, 225, they'd hit for like a set of 5, they'd rest a little, and they'd hit again. And they'd have good speed, and every single rep would be dialed in, focus on explosiveness, focus on good speed past the knee. Everything was dialed in. Okay, 315, same thing. Boom. And you'd almost hear like these 2 pulls. It's almost like they grab, and then there'd be like a big pop into the bar again as they were accelerating. I'm standing there, and we were hitting hang cleans off of their squat rack. Myself and my one buddy, we called him Dewey. And one of the things that one of the guys was telling us is how important technique was for something like a clean. You have to have good technique. And that's the same principle in the deadlift. At a very young age, recognizing that if you need technique in the deadlift to move heavy weight, and you need technique to be fast in the deadlift, you really need it in the clean, you need it in the squat, you need it in the bench. And it's like finding that fine line around technique. I'm going to write this down. The second big principle is you have to identify technique. Now, for this specific video, because we're trying to get you guys to pull those 4 plates, let's just talk about technique in the sense of a conventional pull. Okay, so we're going to go off on a conventional pull technical pattern before we get into some more of these lessons from the old heads at Bodyworks. The biggest thing that I recognize with kids that come in, or older, it's actually more so middle-aged guys that'll come in, is they'll spend 15, 20 seconds on their setup, which is great. Okay, good job. But they spend so much time on their setup that they're constantly concerned about they're super finicky with everything instead of just get set, go. And when you're thinking about any lift, like if you watch the best weightlifters in the world, they get set, boom, and they're moving that clean, they're moving the snatch fast. Same thing with the best deadlifters. They're getting set, boom, and they go. And I think one of the downfalls is that when we haven't pulled, let's say 315 or 225 even, we get so caught up in these aspects of our technique that we actually hinder the aggression that we need to execute. The biggest thing that I recommend is, like, if we're going to take a conventional pull, try to have a stance that's like 12 to 16 inches. Okay, somewhere along those lines. Find where you're comfortable, but just put them there and go. Don't like stand there and do the whole wibble wobble, raise your hands up and like get set again, raise your hands up again and go, and then you drive down to the bar and you get set again. The big thing is set your feet 12 to 18 inches, somewhere in that 12 to 18 inches. Set your feet there every freaking rep. Okay, now the next thing I recommend, like the elbows could be almost right outside the crook of the elbow could be right outside the knee. Okay, so now you drop down, you get that set. You know where the grip's going to be. Okay, every single rep, you know exactly where the grip is going to be. Now the next thing, okay, you want to keep in the deadlift, you want to keep those shins as vertical as possible. Okay, this is one thing that I learned from these guys was like they would talk about the more forward the shin is, what then ends up happening is sometimes when you pass the knee, you can then have a problem trying to lock it out. So you don't in a clean, you're going to have your shin angle here, whereas the shin angle here in a deadlift is going to be a little bit different. So what we want to do then is we want to set up a triangle, okay, from the shoulder. And I like to think about from the shoulder to the lat to the hand. And the big thing I like to teach, okay, so slightly rounded, okay, just like a slight round for the pull of the deadlift, okay. And what I want to do is I want to get set just a little bit right here. Okay, so I'm holding almost a hollow position in my abs. I'm setting my upper back. I'm setting my lats. Okay, and then I'm getting set and I'm putting tension through my whole foot into the floor. Okay, so the technique is set your feet, set your hands, set the triangle in the hollow, and then we want to set tension into the bar by pushing into the floor. And we get that tension in, and then we go. So it's almost like two pulls. Tension, boom. And we want to think, as we come up, I like to think push and almost fall back. Push, chest up. So there's like a couple ways you can think. You can even think push through the full foot. Some guys will literally say if they're long enough that they're just falling backwards, and that helps raise the chest. Some people don't like that cue, so you say raise the chest, bring the hips through. And so now we're establishing this technique, okay, that is executed consistently at 135, at 225, at 315. And that goes back to those lessons of me watching these guys do these pulls and going, man, they're dialed in at every single weight. And so at an early age, I'm 14 years old watching this going like, wow, they're really prioritizing like their intensity. And then I, realized the intensity is a display of their technique. Okay, so that's a really, really important thing is that if you establish the foot position, you establish the hands, you establish how you're going to hold the trunk, you establish the lats with the triangle. And what's interesting is that now when you're going to deadlift heavy, the next day you're going to feel your lats way more than you ever have before. And that's actually going to help keep that bar tighter off the floor and then tighter past the knee. So that's going to lead to better lifts. Now, if you guys need help with your programming, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Inside Peak Strength, we have a powerlifting program and we even have a new path. If you want to train for a specific goal, like getting stronger, you can actually get inside of Peak Strength. You can select your experience level. Okay, so if you haven't deadlifted 4 plates, you're probably advanced, intermediate, or advanced. You're not yet elite. When you're deadlifting 405 to 500, that's when you become elite. So you select that you're an advanced athlete, and then after you select advanced, select that you want to train on a powerlifting program. We've got a 5-day split. We've got a 4-day split. Anything that you want to improve that overall max strength and speed. Again, that's in Peak Strength. You can click on the link down below in our description. Foot stance position, 12 to 18 inches. Okay. Establish the arms coming down, crook of the elbow, get comfortable. Establish the lats with that triangle, okay? Know how to fill your belly button. I even like to think about some people, I don't like to pull with a belt. I've never really liked pulling with a belt. Some people, if they think about putting the belt on, they push into the belt when they bring in that air, okay? And they keep that in there. They don't exhale. They keep it in there, okay? So that's the technique. So we had training partner. The second thing was technique. The third thing, now we're going to establish training frequency. So this is going to be one of those expectations that you set with your training partner. We got a goal. We want to pull 4 plates. Okay, one of the biggest factors that I remember with these old dudes is that they just show up 4 to 5 days a week. And I remember going like, these guys work full time and like they're doing like labor jobs and they're they're ripping in on their Harleys, probably drinking heavily as well on the weekends, but they're training pretty consistently. And for me, what I think is a very easy thing to do is to challenge yourself. You got a training partner, and what I like to do is use this framework called the 25-5. Okay, so 25-5. You're going to commit to 20 weeks, and you're going to do 5 hours a week minimum, okay, for 5 days. Okay, so that means not every day is 5 hours, but you're going to go into the gym 5 days a week, and every day that you're in the gym, you're going to be in there for at least an hour, and you're going to do that for 20 weeks. Okay, so minimum, you're going to get 100 hours over the next 20 weeks of training. Okay, so now you sit there and you can commit, and you say, okay, for 20 weeks, my goal is to increase my deadlift. Now, what ends up happening is that when you're dialed in on increasing your deadlift, you start to do other movements that transfer to your deadlift, and you start to have primary movements of transfer, secondary movements of transfer. Okay, and then what ends up happening is that because your primary goals are deadlift, these other lifts also go up. You've committed 20 weeks to your specific training. And then what ends up happening is now you're easily able to make these goals more achievable, and you hold yourself just a little bit more accountable because you're following that 25-5 framework. Okay, so 25-5, 20 weeks, 5 days a week, and you get 5 hours in a week. Okay, if you're focused and you're dialed in on this is something that you can easily do. So that's that next thing. And when we're doing that, you can set up those splits. You know, the way we do it in Peak Strength is we have a max lower body. We have a dynamic upper body. We do an impulse or a jumps depending on your athletic ability. And then we do the dynamic lower body and the maximal strength upper body. So we sort of flip back and forth, but then we have 2 to 3 days focused on speed work. Okay, so that's another big factor, is that we want to get with that technique and then with that 25-5 framework, we want to get deadlifting once a week. Okay, we want to get the explosive work in, and we want to get the groove established. A lot of you guys also will read like old school stuff, and they'll say, well, you should only deadlift once every 2 weeks. Reasonable. If you're pulling 600, 700 pounds, I don't think it's a bad recommendation. I think it's a decent idea. But a lot of you guys don't even have the work in yet. Like, dude, get to 315 before you even think about backing off deadlift every week. I would literally deadlift every single week. Do you really need to back off a deadlift that much? Not really. Once a week is going to be fine as long as we're balancing the speed or even those primary transfer movements. So that's another big factor there, is that the training frequency is absolutely key. Now, the next thing, this is going to be a great takeaway, is to establish the best reps and sets for technique. Okay, establish the best reps and sets for technique. So what does that mean? That means if we have a day that we're working on technique, let's say it's speed based. All right, I want to take that and say, from a percentage based training, okay, if I want to improve my technique, anywhere between 70 to 75%, all the way up to like 83 to 85%. And I want to do anywhere like 3 to 5 reps. Okay. And the reason why I like it a little bit more than 70%, a little bit south of 85%, is that we want to be able to do technical movements. We want to be able to do these movements with some load. Okay. So if we have some load in there, now our positions get better, and then they will transfer over to heavier weight when we're going heavy and we don't want to think about technique. The whole goal with technical work is that you get it so dialed in with your nervous system that when you go really heavy, you can just shut off and just start screaming and take a lot of caffeine, and you're going to hit the lift. That's the whole goal with having good technique. So we've got to make sure that transfers. That still also means that when we're ramping up, we're hitting those positions that we're looking for, and we're dialing them in as clearly as possible. Now, I think for reps and sets for technique, let's say 6 to 8 sets, 3 to 5 reps, 70 to 83%, you're going to be golden. Okay. Now that's going to be number 4. So we got to identify best technical reps and sets. Now the next thing, best reps and sets for strength. Okay. So that's going to be number 5. If we're looking at the best reps and sets for strength, we're going to be focusing on anywhere from doubles to sets of 4, okay? Singles to sets of 4, 7 sets to 10 sets, okay? It sounds crazy, but 7 to 10 sets, doubles to 4, singles to 4, somewhere in there, okay? Those are the best sets. Going to be 6 to 10 reps 1 to 4, somewhere in there. Percentage, start at 80%. You can ramp up over 95%. Now, one of the big things why I kept that percentage around 83% is that for technique, is because once you get over like 85%, you might see a little bit of fatigue and you'll have a negative performance with your technique. With strength here, we want to keep those reps lower. We don't want to hit fives. We want to do triples. Okay. We want to do doubles. And so that enables us to execute more load while sort of managing that fatigue aspect. So that's a big key factor, is knowing the best reps and set for strength. Okay. Now, that way what you can do is you can go maybe on your dynamic and your speed day, you're doing like a 7 triples at 70%. You're focused on technique. You're focused on really, really good speed of the bar. Okay. On the actual max strength day where we're trying to push the load of the deadlift. Okay. Now we're doing 7 doubles at 85 to 95%. So now we're taking those two and we're sort of playing back and forth to make sure that we're executing specific to our goal to get to those 4 plates. Okay, so we're playing that game. The next game that we've got to play is we look at the primary lifts of transfer. Okay, so number 6, primary lifts of transfer. Okay, we're going to write that down. Primary lifts of transfer. So what does that mean? That means these are the absolute best lifts that transfer over to the deadlift. Okay, so if we're looking at, and there's a couple outside of this, but if we're looking specifically at lifts that transfer over, we're going to look at a box squat. Okay, we're going to look at a front squat or a pause front squat. I'm going to look at a Dimmel deadlift, and I'm going to look at a deficit deadlift. Now, I like to take the primary lifts of transfer, and I'll say, okay, something that as a weightlifting coach that I've learned from the powerlifting world is that on certain ranges, if I do a box squat at a certain point, I hit a box squat here, it's going to actually help my pull off the floor. So even weightlifters will notice an improvement with that pull if they're doing a lower box squat. So what do? If we want to increase our deadlift, we'll do lower box squats. Okay, so it's got a very direct correlation to the deadlift. Okay, now pause front squats. Another, and you can do pause back squats. I would recommend pause high bar back squats. That's another aspect I wanted to bring up, is that we've got to think through, you train high bar and then you do that for 12 weeks. Then the last 8 weeks out of the 20, you train low bar. Okay, that's a one real quick secret. But now we're going back to that primary lift to transfer. The next one would be a pause front squat. Now, a lot of powerlifters don't like to do front squats. But guess what? You do front squats for 20 weeks straight, your back gets really stupid strong. You get more mobile hips, and you're going to be cranking that freaking pull right off the floor. It's going to increase your pull off the floor. Also, now we're looking at one of the things with the box deadlift or the box squat is that if we have the cue to extend the hips quickly off the box, bring them out of hip flexion into hip extension, that will help the lockout of the deadlift as well for a lot of athletes. Now, then we're going to look at Dimmel deadlifts, one of my favorite movements to improve the lockout. So go past the knee, lock out, past the knee. And we do that for sets of anywhere from like 7 to 17 reps. Dimmel deadlifts gives you a good rhythm. It's going to help you find the groove. It's going to help strengthen and hip flexion. Okay, you're lengthening the hamstrings, but it's also going to help that lockout position. And then off the floor, deficit deadlifts are going to improve that position off the floor. It's also going to transfer to the finish of the actual deadlift because you are still doing that full deadlift. So these primary lifts of transfer would be a pause front squat, a box squat, a Dimmel deadlift, and a deficit deadlift. Okay, so those are some really, really key exercises that we're looking for that are primary. Now, the number 7 lesson here that we can use to actually increase your deadlift and get to those 4 plates is that now we're going to focus on those secondary lifts of transfer. So secondary lifts of transfer are going to be movements that target specific weaknesses in your chain. So if we're looking at somebody's got weak hamstrings, we'll do an RDL. If somebody's got a weak low back, we'll do high rep reverse hypers. Okay. If somebody has weak connection between hamstrings, glutes, and low back, we'll do GHD. If somebody's heels are constantly popping with the bar passing their knees, we're going to hammer very heavy kettlebells. Okay, so we're looking at heavy kettlebell swings, like 150-pound kettlebell. Make sure your heels do not pop when you're extending with the hips. Do not pop the heels. Okay, if you can extend with the hips and your heels stay grounded, you're going to improve your deadlift. If you have a weak chain link between the back, the glutes, and the hamstrings, GHD, Okay, hit the GHD 7 to 9 reps, focus on strength. If your erectors, low back are weak, let's hit reverse hyper, sets of 17 to 20 and get some big swinging going when we're talking about that. Those are just those are those three that I absolutely freaking love that are going to transfer phenomenally to you increasing your deadlift. So we're looking at secondary lifts of transfer. And then what we do is we play this game, inside Peak Strength. You're downloading, you're getting inside the powerlifting program. You want 20 weeks that you're going to commit to increasing your deadlift to get those 4 plates. And now you go through this in your programming so that 1 week you do this, the following week or 2 weeks later we hit something else, and then we might come back and forth. And we just play this game of balancing maximal strength with that dynamic work. One thing I want to just chime in here a little bit as well is that I think it's important for powerlifters to learn from weightlifters. I think weightlifters need to learn from powerlifters. And one thing that I learned from powerlifters is to use box squats more frequently, is to use pauses way more frequently. Okay. And one thing I think with powerlifters, they can learn to use more high bar back squats to increase their pulse. Okay, high bar pause back squats, I think also potentiate your pulse. So that's like a little bonus. Recognize that there's things to learn. And then finally, even looking at being more explosive, training your nervous system to be as elastic and as twitchy as possible is going to lead to this much higher performance. So if you're somebody who maybe isn't as coordinated, but you're doing jumps, now all of a sudden you're increasing the intelligence of your nervous system. It can recruit at a higher speed and it can be more stable at that higher speed, which in turn will then lead to a PR in the deadlift. You're going to hit those 4 plates, especially after you download Peak Strength at peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Get to work. Use that 25-5 framework. I'm going to go back through this. Get yourself a good training partner. Know that technique and get it set. Have that training frequency. Again, 25-5. Know the best movements that transfer to the best technique. Understand the best strength exercises, reps and sets. Know the best reps and sets for technique. Understand those primary lifts of transfer. Understand those secondary lifts of transfer. Get that work done. Tag us when you hit those big time PRs. If you want more videos around deadlift, click on this video right here, because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.